Good day, everyone. This video is talk about thermoregulations in endotherms. I am Mr. Ong from College Tingkatan 6 Seriputra. Previous lessons, we have discussed about the importance of homeostasis and the description of the homeostatic control system in mammals. We learned about the negative feedback system and the positive feedback system as well. Today, we would like to talk about the physiological and behavioral control in thermoregulations of endotherms. As we discussed before, homeostatic mechanisms maintain the internal environment within the normal physiological limits that support life through the negative feedback system. And then all organ systems participate in these homeostatic mechanisms, but the nervous system and endocrine system play the major roles in homeostasis. Regulations by negative feedback mechanisms in mammals involving either the endocrine glands or the nervous system or both. Okay, either by the endocrine system or the nervous system alone, okay, or both together, coordinate. The nervous system maintains the partial pressure of respiratory gases, okay, such as carbon dioxide and oxygen, okay, being transported in the blood, and the blood pressure in the arteries and the heart rate. Whereas the endocrine system controls the osmotic concentration, okay, regarding the solute potential of the blood via regulations of the water content and the concentrations of ions, okay, the solutes. And also the concentration of those essential metabolites such as blood glucose. And in controlling or in regulating body temperature, these thermoregulations, they combine both actions of nervous and endocrine system. This video is only discussed about the thermoregulations in endotherms. Birds, mammals, and some species of fish, they are endotherms. Endotherms means they has a high metabolic rate, as much as 6 times higher than ectotherms. Endotherms have homeostatic mechanisms that maintain body temperature despite changes in the external temperature. Endotherms respond more rapidly to internal and external stimuli and can be active even in low winter temperature by producing heat to warm body as a byproduct of metabolic activity, as well as by reducing the heat loss. The constant body temperatures allows a higher rate of enzymes activity in the endotherms to survive in their living habitats. Body temperature is determined by the rate at which heat is produced and the rate at which heat is lost to or gained from the outside environment. Many animals have elaborate homeostatic mechanisms for regulating body temperature. Some are physiological responses, some are behavioral responses, and others are the structural adaptations. Thermoregulation is the process of maintaining body temperature within the normal limit despite changes in the surroundings temperature. As from the diagram or the graph here can see, bobcat is an endotherm in which the body temperature is maintained at a normal narrow limit despite the changes of the surrounding temperature. But ectotherms, their body temperatures will change accordingly, okay, to the surrounding temperature. So therefore, thermoregulations is a unique, what we call a physiological process found in endotherm. The strategies for maintaining body temperatures that are available to an endotherms may restrict the type of environment it can inhabit. Each species has an optimal environmental temperature range. For example, birds, they have a body temperature which is slightly higher than human. Physiological responses in thermoregulations. Endotherms have a variety of physiological mechanisms for maintaining temperature homeostasis. So they regulate heat productions and regulate heat exchange, okay, with the environment. So for the heat gain, through the basal metabolisms by cellular respirations, and muscular activity, that means contractions of the muscles, the skeletal muscles during exercise. And the muscular activity, the contraction of the skeletal muscles during shivering. Thyroxines and adrenalines will increase the metabolic rate. So this is how the endotherms can obtain or can gain heat from those processes or activities. Endotherms also are able to reduce the heat lost, okay, to reduce the heat lost, okay, by vasoconstrictions and the contraction of the hair erector muscle. All of these mechanisms will be discussed later. For heat lost, we can through the evaporations, okay, by pant or through sweating. And then the heat loss from the endotherms can through the conductions, conventions, and radiation. And we also can increase the heat loss by regulating we can regulate our body temperature by increasing the heat loss through the vasodilations and relaxations of hair erector muscle. The thermoregulations involve negative feedback mechanisms as we discussed in the previous video, which is operated by the thermoregulatory center in hypothalamus. Okay. Then the thermoreceptor detects changes in temperature. The thermoreceptor, or we call the cold receptor and the warm receptor in the skin, they are important for detecting changes, okay, in environmental temperature and can act as advanced warning system because the temperature change starts from the outside body. And in mammals, they are also thermoreceptor. They're located, they found in the hypothalamus, which can regulate the body core temperature. The thermoregulatory center in the hypothalamus of the brain consists of two regions, the heat gain center and the heat loss center. As you see this diagram, you can see the thermoregulatory center, and then we have the thermoreceptor, okay, which is in the skin and also in the hypothalamus. So here we use the term peripheral thermoreceptor, and here the central thermoreceptor. So the thermoregulatory center is found in the hypothalamus. So these are the what we call the effectors or the responses, okay, can be carried out, okay, or signaled by the thermoregulatory center. So here's are the behavioral changes. So this one is due to, for the behavioral responses. Okay, the either is for the heat gains or heat loss. In heat loss center, okay, the heat loss center of the regulatory center, they stimulate sweat glands to secrete more sweat because they want to stimulate or trigger the heat loss. And at the same time, the heat loss center, they inhibit, yeah, they inhibit the arterioles in the skin to constrict. So that means they will cause vasodilations. Okay, vasodilations. Okay, so vasodilation, that means here was increase the heat loss. Okay, so remember the heat loss center, the role of the heat loss center is to increase the heat loss. So by sweating, okay, or through vasodilations, okay, or they inhibit the hair erector muscle to contract. So that means will relax. Okay, we cannot say the heat loss center stimulate the hair erector muscle to contract here, because if they contract, there will be trap more air. Okay, so here is inhibits. So they are caused what we call relaxations of hair erector muscle. Okay, we can say trigger, stimulate the relaxations of what we call the hair erector muscle. So here also say they inhibit the skeletal muscles to contract. Okay, so no severing. And to inhibit, okay, to inhibit the pituitary glands, okay, to secrete the thyroid stimulating hormones, okay, and then so that they also inhibit the thyroid glands to produce less thyroxines. So this one they have this what we call the TSH, okay, was stimulate the thyroid glands to produce thyroxine, but here is less secretion, so therefore well less thyroxine secretions from the thyroid glands. Then the heat loss center, they will inhibit the liver and other organs, okay, to reduce the metabolic rate, okay, because we want to have the heat, what we call to stimulate the heat loss or to reduce the heat gain, okay. In contrast, in the heat gain center, they will stimulate this arterial, okay, what we call the vasoconstrictions, the smooth muscle in the arterial, okay, in the skin to constrict, so to reduce the heat loss, okay, and also to stimulate the hair erector muscle to contract so that they can trap thicker air layers, okay, because the air is a good what we call a heat insulator, so here can reduce the heat loss from the skin. And also to stimulate skeletal muscle to contract, okay, in severing, okay. So because the contraction of the muscle, okay, the skeletal muscle more frequently, so will produce more heat. And also stimulate the pituitary glands to secrete the thyroid stimulating hormones, okay, in order to stimulate the thyroxines, the thyroxine secretion, okay, from the thyroid glands, and also to stimulate the liver and other organs to increase their metabolic rate, okay. And at the same time, the heat gain center, they will inhibit the sweat glands, so to secrete less sweat, so that less heat will be lost from the skin. Okay, so when we want to discuss or to explain the what we call the negative feedback mechanisms here, so we step by step. So for example, here we start with when human body temperature rises above normal. Okay, so we must write like this. We cannot just say when human body temperature rises. Okay, we must say above normal. Okay, the normal body temperature. So the thermoreceptors detect the changes. The thermoreceptor, they detect the changes and generate nerve impulses to be sent to thermoregulatory center in the hypothalamus. Okay, in where? Hypothalamus. Okay. Then the heat loss center. Okay. Now see, when the human body temperature rises above normal, so we want to lose the such amount of heat from our body. So therefore, the heat loss center in the hypothalamus is stimulated and responds to that signal. Okay. So this thermoregulatory center, that means referring to the heat loss center, they send the nerve impulses, okay, via motor neurons to sweat glands, okay, to increase the sweat secretions. So more heat is lost through evaporation of sweat. So the heat loss center, the last sense nerve impulse, that means to inhibit via the sympathetic nerve. Okay, so for here only sympathetic nerve. So to smooth muscle, okay, to smooth muscle in the wall of arterioles in the skin that cause them to dilate. So when last nerve impulse sending through the sympathetic nerve, okay, to the smooth muscle of the arteriole in the skin. So that means vasodilations. That means the smooth muscle will relax. So they cause the vasodilations. So more blood, okay, can circulate beneath the skin. Okay, bringing heat. Okay, bringing heat to the body surface. So therefore, the skin acts as a heat radiator that allows heat to radiate from the body surface into the environment. So when the body temperature rises above normal, the hair erector muscle, okay, the hair erector muscle, okay, are less stimulated. Okay, not like this one. So they are less stimulated. So that means relaxed. So by the what we call the heat loss center here, and trap less A. Okay, so that means only the thin A layer is trapped. So the heat loss from the skin increases. At the same time, the thermoregulatory centers less signals the anterior pituitary glands. Okay, so less secrete the anterior pituitary glands less to secrete thyroid stimulating hormones. So less thyroxine is secreted, okay, by the thyroid glands. And then at the same time, the adrenal glands are less stimulated to secrete adrenaline. So therefore, both these two hormones are adrenalines and the thyroxines so when they are less, so the rate of metabolisms in the body tissue decreases, then less heat is produced. The skeletal muscle are less stimulated to contract, so less shivering, or we can say no shivering when you are your body temperature is increased above the normal. Okay, so all these activities or the mechanism, they will bring your body temperature, okay, return, the decrease and returns to normal level. So you must have returns to the normal level. Okay. So when body temperature decreases below normal, okay, now it's below normal, the set point, which is 30. Here we say 36.9 degrees Celsius. So the thermoreceptors, okay, detect, okay, the changes, the peripheral and the advanced warning is the peripheral thermoreceptor, okay. So and generate the nerve impulses to be sent to the thermoregulator center in the hypothalamus. So in this case, is the heat gain center. The heat gain center is stimulated and responds to the signal. So now your body needs to produce more heat and reduce the heat loss. So this thermoregulatory center sends nerve impulses via the motor neurons, okay, to inhibit the sweat glands. Okay, to inhibit the sweat glands, decreasing the sweat secretions. Okay, and less sweat secreted, so less heat will be lost from the skin. So less heat is lost through the evaporation of sweat. Then the heat gain center also stimulated to sense the nerve impulse, okay, via the sympathetic nerve, okay, to the smooth muscle of the atrial. So from here you can see that the frequency of the nerve impulse that sensed through this sympathetic nerve increases, okay, compared to the previous one. So the smooth muscle of the atrials are stimulated to contract, so cause the vasoconstrictions. Okay. So less blood circulates beneath the skin, so less heat is brought to the body surface. Then less heat is lost from the skin through the radiation. Okay, so the one is to reduce the heat loss. Okay, then the thermoregulatory center or the heat gain center will stimulate skeletal muscles to sever. Okay, so contractions are more frequent. So in order to produce more heat to increase the body temperature. And the hair erector muscle are stimulated to contract, okay, so that they can trap a thick layer, okay, of A. And then we know A is a good heat insulator. Okay, so the less heat will be lost from the skin. Then for the hormones, okay, the thermoregulatory center stimulate the hypothalamus and trigger the anterior pituitary glands to secrete more thyroid stimulating hormones. Okay, so that to stimulate the thyroid glands to secrete more thyroxines. And then the adrenal glands are stimulated to secrete more adrenalines. So both thyroxine and adrenalines increase the heat productions, okay, through by increasing the metabolism rate, okay, of the body tissue. All right. So this is how the hormones are actions, okay, in regulating the what we call the body temperature. All right. So like the thermoregulation center maintains the body temperature fluctuating again. So we say they are maintained in the normal narrow limit. Okay, the set point is 37 degrees Celsius. Okay, so the what we call the minimum, okay, the minimum range is 36.7 and the maximum is 37.2. So that means if the body temperature below this set point, okay, the 36.7 degrees Celsius, so the thermoreceptor will be stimulated. And also when the body temperatures that reach 37.2 and above this 37.2 degrees Celsius, so the thermoreceptor will be stimulated. Okay. So it is a dynamic as long as they fall in between this range 36.7 until the 37.2 degrees Celsius. So it is considered as in a steady state. So these temperatures are referring to the core body temperature, not like that you scan now the what we call the COVID-19. So when you visit to any premise, so you need to scan your body temperature. So the one is not the core body temperature. Maybe you're scanning like 36.2 degrees Celsius. Okay. So because the activities of the effectors is influenced by the effects they produced, so and this regulation is known as the negative feedback mechanisms. So these homeostatic mechanisms help return the body temperatures to normal. All right. So in summary, okay, from here we can see this one I draw for you. So for example, here this is the temperature of the external environment. Okay, this is the hypothalamus temperature. So normally it is referring to the blood temperature. So each of these stimulus they have their responsible thermoreceptor. Okay, so then they will send the nerve impulse to the thermoregulatory center in the hypothalamus. Okay, so here will produce all these are the involuntary responses. Okay, this one is voluntary responses. This is the behavioral one, behavioral response. Okay, in which if your thermoreceptor in the skin, okay, then when they detect the decrease in the temperature, the body temperature, okay, lower than the set point. At the same time, they send the nerve impulse to the thermoregulatory center, and then at the same time, they are sent to the cerebral cortex, so that you will have the voluntary responses. For example, you will move here and there, okay, and then you will try to to find something or to find the heat source, okay. So all of these, they are voluntary responses. So it's a behavioral responses. So, but we are more focused on the physiological responses here. So which are the involuntary responses? Okay. So from here, like skeletal muscle for the involuntary responses is severings occur when the body temperature is below the set point. So if above the set point, so will be less or no severing. And then for the skin arterioles, okay. So and this one, the what we call the hair erector muscle. So the nerve impulse will sent from the thermoregulatory center from the sympathetic nerve, okay, to the skin arteriole. So they will cause the vasoconstriction or vasodirections. Depends on they are either is a below or above the set point temperature. So this one also, the hair erector muscle, they either is contract or relaxed. And sweat glands here is either is a secret more sweat or less. Okay, so in terms of the hormones here, so again the anterior pituitary glands either is stimulated or inhibited, okay, to produce the thyroid stimulating hormones. Okay, either to stimulate the thyroid glands to produce more thyroxine. Okay, if your body temperature is below the normal set points. If above, so will be less thyroid stimulating hormones produced. Okay, and therefore the thyroid gland is less stimulated to produce thyroxines. So same to the adrenal glands here lah. Okay, so that means from this diagram you can actually we can conclude the physiological responses okay, in the thermoregulations. So in the other responses, behavioral responses, so endotherms also, they can control the body temperature through these behavioral responses. So this one is called the voluntary responses that we discussed just now. So including the hibernation, migrations to a more suitable climate, for example here. Okay, hibernation is a long-term torpor. Okay, torpor means physical inactivities. In a response to winter in a resting state of deep sleep. Okay, we call this hibernation as the winter sleep. Okay, winter sleep. Then the endotherms metabolic rate and the body temperature drop considerably as a way of scarcity of food. Okay, because winter, so most of the producer, okay, the plants, they will have the low activities. So they also undergoes what we call the dormant. So there will be a scarcity of food and also cold weather. So endotherms such as bats and the hedgehogs that hibernate store unsaturated fats as the energy sources. Okay, estivation. Estivation is a state of torpor that caused by the lack of food or the water during periods of high temperature. So we call these estivations as summer sleep. Okay, just now hibernation is the winter sleep. So this estivation is a summer sleep. So during estivation, some mammals retreat to their burrows. Okay. And examples, the cactus mouse enter a state of hibernation during the winter in response to the cold and the scarcity of food. But during summer, they also undergoes estivation in response to the lack of either food or water, and also high temperature. Migration is the seasonal movement of animals from one habitat to another in search of food, better climate condition, or reproductive needs. So migrations happen seasonally in certain animals species and involve a return journey. Okay. The cape ground squirrel positions its tail to shade its body from the direct ray of the sun. And elephants spray themselves with cool water. And also from here, you can see the behavioral responses that shown by different type of animals. In terms of structural adaptations, endotherms have structural adaptations for maintaining the body temperature. For example, the insulating feathers of birds, hair of mammals, and insulating layers of fat in birds and mammals reduce the heat loss from the body. So jackrabbits have a large ears with an extensive network of blood vessels, so they allow the rapid heat loss, okay, to the surrounding. So all of these, they are the structural adaptations for thermoregulations. Okay, so these also are the structural adaptations, okay, for the birds, and then to have what we call the heat transfer, okay, from the arteries to the nearby veins, thus reducing the heat loss to the water. Okay, otherwise they will the body temperature in the birds will reduce. Okay, largely or greatly. So that's all for this video. So in this video, we explain the physiological responses, especially in thermoregulation of endotherms. And then I also share with you with the behavioral responses, and the other one is the structural adaptations. So in thermoregulation of endotherms. So for the next lessons, we'll describe the structure of the liver and explain the role of each component. So that's all for this video, and thank you very much. Bye.